guys? I hope you're doing well. Over my break, I was listening to a lot of lo-fi house mixes by Geezus8 and also got some comments asking about a lo-fi cassette or house geek video. Some of this is similar to my Shroomiland video from a few weeks ago, but I'm going to go over two beats in this one to show you some differences in the style. As always, if you have any suggestions, please comment those down below, and I hope you can learn something new today. So first things first, we got this preset from Vital. I laid down these 7th chord kind of stabs and changed either the root note or the third in the chord stab, and then kind of messed around putting down this top line melody, which I then put some Fruity Delay 3 on with some typical ping pong settings that I put on, with it turned down about 30% in the mix. And I also did a little low cut EQ in the channel. So real quick, that first part sounds like this. Next up, we got this other Vital preset, and what I did was copy and pasted the chords over from this first progression, and then I deleted the top line. I did Control A, I believe, and then Control L to elongate all of the notes. And then I put some Fruity Convolver on it. I turned up the wet a little bit, and I believe it's on the Blur White preset. And also did a low cut in the channel EQ. So that sounds like this. I think it's pretty important if you have this main melody to kind of copy and paste it over, but turn it into a slightly different sound, like a pad versus like a key or a stab sort of thing, just to give fuller sort of sound that has more dynamic range. Next up, we got this Vital preset, which I tried to do like short lead plucky sort of sounds with, and I added this Diary of the Past Portal preset, this gross beat preset, so it kind of fades in and out slowly in a gated sort of way, and then also a little bit of wider to give it its own space in the mix, which gives us this pretty cool texture. Then after that, we got this kind of crazy ARP melody. I think what I did was copy and pasted the chords over from this second sound, and then did Control A, then Alt A to arpeggiate it. And then after that, I put a whole bunch of effects on it, as you can see. We got this gross beat, some EQ to cut the lows, and then I also made a little like node here, right clicked it, clicked make dynamic. If it's not already dynamic, if you right click it, it should say make dynamic. I believe it automatically like attenuates any frequencies that become a problem in this area. Then some Shaperbox 3 as like an additional gross beat kind of thing, along with some halftime just on the 1 bar setting, because I wanted to slow it down but then also manipulate it in a couple different ways, which is kind of the reason why I essentially have like 3 gross beats or 3 halftimes on it at once. This ping pong delay set to about 50% in the mixer. Some crystalline on this Siren Head Cries preset at about 33% in the mixer. And then Halo Pan 3D, which isn't straight back behind your head, but a little bit to the left in this case. And I think it sounds pretty cool. You don't have to put that many effects on a melody layer like I did, but in this instance, I just thought it was cool, especially building off of that last effect with like the gated rises and falls. But with all that put together, that sounds like this. Then lastly, we got this respace, and typically in these songs, they'll either use a respace as a layer with another bass or just like an FM bass, which I'll show you in the next beat / example. But for this, I just felt like a respace fit a little more, and that sounds like this. And then, because a lot of these songs use vocal chops, I have, I believe, 3 different vocal layers. You can do either sometimes 1 or 2 if you want, but when you do use 1 or 2, I'd probably suggest manipulating them, maybe like, putting one down, then making a copy and reversing it, or if you pitched it up, pitch it down an equal amount just to create some variation and cool textures. So for this first one, I stretched it to the BPM, reversed it, and then pitched it down 3 semitones with no effects on the master. But what I did do is I right-clicked, did chop, then I think I did patterns and maybe drum and bass half beat or one of these stutter options. I do unfortunately forget, but it does sound like this. So next up, I have these 2 vocals, which I didn't realize I put in the same mixer channel. But this first one is stretched and pitched up 6 semitones, and the end is rolled off a little just so this like hit slash texture was cut out. And then the second vocal is stretched and pitched up 4 semitones. And in the channel EQ, I made sort of a band pass, so there's a low cut at 90 hertz, and then at about 6K, there's a high cut. And those sound like this. So before I play some of these melodies all together, I do want to just quickly say that I have a few of these connected to a sidechain bus. And this is pretty easy to set up. What you want to do is take any melodic elements you have and you want to route them specifically to the sidechain. So you want to click on the mixer channel it's on, right click it and do route only to this track. Then you take a kick, right click on the same sidechain channel and do sidechain to this track. Then what you want to do is open up a compressor. I always use Fruity Limiter. Then you want in this sidechain mode, you'll right click where your kick is. So that way the sidechain basically activates. So whenever the kick hits, it ducks to whatever settings you have. I usually set the threshold around 24-25 dB, a softer knee, and then a ratio between 2:1 and 4:1. And what this is basically for each amount that goes in, only 1 decibel comes out. So with 2-4, for every 2 decibels that goes in, 1 decibel comes out. So you're essentially halving the volume. And then for 4:1, you'd be quartering the volume every time the sidechain is activated. That being said, I'll play a little bit with and then without the kick. Oh, I also put some OTT on the sidechain to give the vocals some extra dynamic range, which in turn affected these first 2 melodic elements a little bit, which is pretty cool. The melodies sound like this. So now moving on to the drums, we got a pretty standard pattern and workflow going on. You saw what I did with the kick, and then for the rest of these drums, I set up a drum bus. So it rolls off the high end a little bit, and there is some crystalline for a reverb, and some ping pong delay set very, very low in the mix. I'd recommend having it at 10% or less because it can get kind of annoying with the drums being delayed too much. But for each of the drums, we got the kick, a clap, this sort of percussive rim shot, another percussive thing that I kind of used as a hi-hat, an actual open hat, and a ride. So altogether, the drums sound like this. Another important thing to note is that for this percussive piece and the open hat, what I did was Control A and then Control R, and then I only in this randomizer window have the levels enabled with the velocity going downwards and the bipolar turned off. So that means that everything that's randomized, only the volume is being changed and it's not being increased, it's being decreased. If you turned it the other way, everything would be randomized to be louder. And if you had bipolar, it would basically go to that extreme, louder and quieter. And the same goes for panning. It would go like left or right, which is why you'd want the bipolar to be on so you don't have everything just super panned one direction. And then finally, because I like it, I added this like city traffic ambience super low in the mix. That's not really a thing that is in these songs, but for whatever reason, I just always like adding an ambience. It makes the track feel more finished and also a little more full. Like there's just stuff going on. Even if you can't hear it, you're like, oh, there's a fuller bass to the sound. Here's the preview. So for this beat, I tried to go more off of the suggestion comment that I got from the person who specifically mentioned Lo-Fi Cassette and House Geek. So I started trying to recreate this sort of detuned key sound. So what I tried to do was made a plucky sort of shape in the envelope, and then I enabled the second oscillator, turned the volume all the way down, and adjusted the formant a little bit and moved it a little off center and made this first oscillator get the FM source from this second oscillator. And I gave each oscillator multiple voices. And then for this LFO over here, I set it to this sine wave sort of shape, set it to quarter note, and I dragged it to the fine pitch, I believe, of each oscillator. I also enabled this filter, added a bunch of these effects. The main core thing you want to focus on is probably the delay and the reverb. I EQ'd it a little bit because for whatever reason, without the EQ enabled, there's like just a random spike really low and really high in volume. But I also added the flanger for a little bit of texture. And then the distortion for the bit crush / downsample, also for the texture. And then I don't really do this, but I wanted to try and get a macro set up. So what you can do is over here with the macro wheels, you can drag the macro onto different settings. That way, as you adjust the macro, in this case to make it more wobbly, you can do that without having to tweak every like LFO setting or this or that, which is pretty cool. I also went over here to the matrix and made the detune of the oscillator be bipolar so it moves back and forth. I also added a little bit of RC20 just to make it a little more wobbly. So without it, sounds like this. But obviously with RC20 enabled, it does sound a bit wobblier. Then I also used wider to give it its own space in the mix, and then made this super simple progression. Next up, we have this super simple pad. Again, I'm doing the FM thing with turning oscillator 2 all the way down, making this source get the FM from oscillator 2, and then only turning it up slightly just so there's not a lot of annoying textures. And then again with the effects, reverb, delay, EQ, and then I also added on a chorus, and then also a slight low cut in the mixer EQ, and laid down these kind of descending chords. Then after that, we got this FM bass. So I took this sub bass preset. I believe I rolled off this envelope. I pitched a second oscillator up 7 to kind of mimic a Boda M1 organ, which I think is pretty cool. I also did the FM thing, except I didn't turn down the volume level in the second oscillator. And then for the effects, I added a compressor with the low band on, this little EQ to roll off the extreme muddy lows but boost it a little bit, and this hard clip distortion. And I also made a very plucky pattern, which sounds like this. And then I took this Reese bass that I had, added the second oscillator, pitched it up 7, but also turned down the volume and did the FM trick. And then copy and pasted those same bass notes, did Control A and Control L to elongate them to make this sound. As you can quickly see, it does eventually get layered in, and then in one 4-bar section, I believe, no, 8-bar section, it does play by itself. And that, I think, adds a nice amount of variation. And then the last melodic element is this vocal. I stretched it and pitched it up 7 semitones, and then I believe I right-clicked, chop, patterns. Maybe this one was the drum and bass half beat, or it was chop, complex, beat shuffle, one of those two. And then I added a low cut in the channel EQ, but also some crystalline for reverb and Fruity Delay 3 on the ping pong settings. And that is really what makes these vocals sound the way they do in these songs. Some of the melody and the vocal are attached to the sidechain, which again does have some OTT on it, so that does increase like the dynamic range and everything. But really, even without that, reverb and delay really gets that feeling of lo-fi house vocals. So yeah, real quick, this is what it sounds like with and without the kick. So yeah, pretty cool, but much more dark and moody compared to the other example. Then with the drums, we got the same sort of standard stuff. Obviously, here's the kick again. I believe it's tuned to A, which we are in A minor for the key. This closed hat. An open hat. This snare. This other clap. And then these two drum loops that I kind of chopped up. So here's the first one. And then for this second one, what I did is I kind of chopped up the drum loop how I wanted to. Then I copy and pasted it and then slightly moved it over to give it more of a, I think, a delayed feeling. I don't know, I just thought it was pretty cool to have it like that. And as you can see here real quick, there are some spots where only that first layer plays, and then some spots where this second layer lays, so it's like a call and response sort of thing. So altogether, the drums sound like this. And then with the melody, everything sounds like this. Real quick before I forget, how I have the master set up is I have ZL-EQ. This is like a free open source alternative to FabFilter's EQ. I have a low cut at about 20 hertz just because it was really muddy. And then at about 6500 hertz, I have a high cut that kind of slowly but then steeply rolls off with the 24 dB per octave setting. I have MAME, which I reduced the bit rate a little bit, and then also reduced the amount of high frequencies that get through. And then in the channel EQ, did another high cut at about 8K. That's gonna about do it for me. I'm not sure which, but I'll put one of these, maybe both of these, up on YouTube and SoundCloud when this video goes up. But other than that, thank you all so much for sticking with me. Sorry to keep you waiting, but I am going to get back into my groove. And as always, if you have any suggestions, please don't be afraid to comment those down below. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope to see you again soon.